Good day, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. What I have in my hands could very well be the last commercially made typewriter ever made. Stay tuned. Now, I think I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Joe, this isn't a typewriter. This is a label maker. This is a typewriter. Well, you're right. This is a typewriter. This, however, is a keyboard-operated thermal printer. A thermal printer that prints narrow strips, but it has a QWERTY keyboard. It is battery-operated, in this case, with 4 AAA batteries. And it is essentially a miniature, smaller than a Barbie typewriter, strip thermal typewriter. Typewriter that types on half-inch thick strips of thermal paper. Because these label maker cartridges are thermal in operation. And in this case, these are half-inch or 12 millimeter wide thermal strips. And I was interested today, when I was in the Type Club Live, as to whether I could figure out how to make one of these work with a strip of thermal paper cut from regular fax paper or whatever instead of a cartridge like this. Now, one way you could do it is to take apart the cartridge, if you could, and wind up a roll of half-inch wide thermal paper taped together in strips into the cartridge. That's certainly one way. But I think I have a way of making this work with an external supply of thermal paper instead of using an inner cartridge. And that's what I'm going to try today. Now, what do I mean by the last typewriter? Well, I believe there is probably Nakajima in Japan is still making daisy wheel typewriters, and there's a very poorly made mechanical typewriter made in China. But other than that, there are no typewriters being made anymore. And once those two are no longer being made, the only typewriter-like device that we may have left might be thermal label makers. This is a Brother brand P-Touch thermal label maker, and it is model PT80. And Brother has made a whole series of different versions of these label makers over the years. Brother also made thermal typewriters back in the 1980s. I happen to have several of them, and they're among my favorite thermal typewriters. This particular thermal label maker uses 4 AAA batteries, and it uses the half-inch style, in this case MK231, label maker cartridges that fit in like so. And you might notice that there is like a center hole to the cartridge, but the label maker itself doesn't actually have a center spindle for that hole. How the tape is driven through the machine is this white bracket on the right side. There is a pinch roller, a rubber pinch roller attached to it. If you push this little end of the bracket right here, that pinch roller engages like that, and it pulls the label tape across this thermal print head on the end of this ribbon cable, and it pulls it out of the machine like that. But overall, in terms of how I'm going to make this work, I'm going to be cutting strips of thermal paper into half-inch wide pieces, tape them together, and what I think I'll do is I'm going to have an external spool, maybe a typewriter ribbon spool, wrapped with this thermal paper. I'll probably make a little base, like a wooden base, with a shaft that holds my external supply of thermal paper. The label maker will sit on that base, and the paper tape will go into the slot around this little support where the head is, and around this way, and back out by the pinch roller, and back out that way again. So one of the mysteries that I was trying to examine is what actually moves the pinch roller in to engage the tape. So if you insert a cartridge, you can see there's a gap there. The pinch roller is not actually pushing against the tape. And as it turns out, it ends up being, when you put the lid on, this protrusion right here, this beveled angled protrusion, fits into this slot apparently. And there is a bevel on the back side of this white plastic bracket for the pinch roller, and that bevel is pushed by that protrusion like that. There are various formatting features on this particular label maker, including the size of the characters and whether they're underlined, bolded, italics, or different variations of the same thing. What I did here is I printed out the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, but I printed it in the small size font at 1/2 normal width and with a carriage return midway through the phrase. And so it'll actually print 2 lines onto a strip, a 1/2 inch strip. So if I counted this right, this is 79 characters maximum. So that's roughly the size of a typed line on a conventional Pica typewriter maybe. So there's a little bit of fiddliness to this process. The thermal side has to go against, like this, against the print head. So I'm just going to feed the strip of paper through the same slot that it exits at. And I want to start it just a little bit beyond the pinch roller, like that. And I'm going to go ahead and put the lid on. Let's type a message, shall we? And this is just like thumb typing on your phone, kind of, sorta. Reminds me of those earlier smartphones, or not so smartphones, that had keyboards that had it really ideal for thumb typing. Well, let's print it, shall we, and see what happens. Here we go. It's a little crooked. So, the quick brown fox, the quick brown fox, the quick brown fox. It's actually quite cool. Well, one thing you can see right here is a problem is when you feed the paper in through the slot this way and around the corner, this is angled at 45 degrees. It has to wrap back around and go through the pinch roller. And it looks like the angle of this is causing the tape to want to crawl up toward the top. Even though the lid is on, it's apparently not keeping it from moving up. So I'm thinking I might cut a piece of cardboard and make a little guide that I'll tape to here. It'll just make a little vertical angle here, and it'll make a little corner that the tape can go around, and maybe it'll keep it a little more level at the right angle. Well, I'm going to use a little notch like this cut in the piece of cardboard on the theory that the paper will stay underneath this tab as it goes around the corner. Well, I was hoping to be able to measure the width in here. So it is a little wider than a 1/2 inch. I just have to be more accurate at cutting it to a 1/2 inch, it looks like. So a little over 0.528. So I do have enough room, if it was actually a 1/2 inch, for this to turn freely. So I got to do a little bit of work there. Well, okay, so measuring from the outside of the edge where the cut happens to the inside of this molding mark is under a 1/2 inch slightly. So if I could keep my paper even with this molding mark here, it should be okay. It should fit within those spools just fine. Well, I've carefully cut some 1/2 inch wide strips. I was using a transparent straight edge to hold down the paper so when I cut it, it won't slip, and hopefully keep it straight. It looked pretty good. And then I noticed that this little groove in here that's generally used for the paper guide, like that, happens to be about a 1/2 inch wide. So I think I can use this as a splicing table or a splicing block. I can slip these in here and put a little piece of tape like that. Actually, it would be the other side, the non-thermal side. So I think I have a splicing block built into my cutting board. How cool is that? All right, so make sure which side's the thermal. That's the thermal side that goes face down. Get the tape centered on that strip. Butt it up neatly. Finish taping it. Okay. I've rethought this, and it has to be thermal side to the outside of the spool. When it makes the loop, the thermal side will be on the inside of the loop where the print head is. So you can see my little thermal marks that I've made on the ends of these just to verify which way was which as I was splicing them together. Looks okay so far. Okay, this is our little holder made from scraps of wood. I actually only had 3 feet, but it's a tripod base, so it shouldn't wobble. Machine screw. So the idea is the printer sits in here, nested in there. And then we have the bolt is where the spool sits, and it'll feed paper from this side into the slot, and the paper comes back out around that way. Okay, so this is the full sheet of paper wound on here. You can see I have quite a bit of room for maybe close to a second sheet of paper. So maybe 2 sheets of paper might fit on this spool here. Okay, so I'm going to have to flip the roll around, and we will try to feed it like a loop. I think what I'm going to do is like bend it, fold it, make a crease in it, so this paper stays underneath my little cardboard guide. Something like that. Okay. Then I put the back on, and then we flip around both of these at once and put this spool here, that there. So it looks like it likes to unwind itself. Okay, that's what it wants to do. Well, let's try deleting the, so let's just try printing it and see what happens here. Okay, now we would like to type a second sentence that's different. So we're going to clear the note and say, and we will continue printing. Now let's get these all set here. And my salutation here. So I just wrote this to an imaginary person named Bob, and I realize now this could be Bob Marshall, our fellow typewriter guy. Well, there we have a thermally printed short typewritten letter. Put this in the mail, send it off to somebody. This may be the last kind of typewritten text we ever do. And of course, I believe that you should use probably a glue stick is a better idea than just taping it down. In this case, I went back and untaped each strip and glue sticked them down, and it does stick a lot better. It looks more like a regular typewritten page, or at least it looks like a well-made ransom note. Why go to all the trouble to make your own strips of label maker stuff out of thermal paper and then tape or glue them together afterwards when you can just use label maker cartridges? They're already around, they're already made. Why have to go to the trouble of all this? Well, I think the real reason is because of cost. These cartridges aren't cheap, whereas a roll of fax paper is very, very much cheaper, but you do have to put some labor into cutting them, figuring out a way to do it that it's easy and not too time-consuming and gives good results. That's the main reason I went down this rabbit hole, is for the sake of the cost of these cartridges. Well, I hope you understood that this project is based strictly on whimsy. It's a whimsical idea. It's not really intended to be serious, although, in a sense, it is serious, because if you go to the trouble of making one of these little holders and go to the trouble especially of cutting sheets of rolls of thermal paper into half-inch wide or however wide you need strips of paper, taping them together, rolling them onto a typewriter spool, that you could indeed do this, and then of course you'd have to cut apart your strip and tape it together on a sheet of paper to make a letter of sorts. And it is a whimsical idea. It's not very efficient as a writing device or word processor, but it does transfer, keyboarded thoughts onto paper with a little bit more work than you might ordinarily want to do with a typewriter, certainly. But it does show, going into the future, some of the ideas, creative ingenuity that we might have to employ in order to continue having typewriter-like devices. Certainly, though, if you keep your manual typewriters and electric typewriter machines healthy, working, using all the tools and resources that we now have in the typosphere, I think we promise to see our typewriters should be working well into the next century. But in the meantime, there could be ingenious people out there that figure out a better way to do this. Like, for instance, a cottage industry of how to take rolls or sheets of thermal paper and make spooled thermal paper. That probably isn't too hard to do in terms of a cottage industry if there was a market for this kind of stuff. Yeah, it's a whimsical, silly, crazy idea, and that's what we like to do. It's a creative idea, and I encourage you, stay creative. Do crazy things like this. Have fun with it. And in the meantime, I wish you the very best. Have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye for now.